haven, preserving the eternal annals of Warhammer.
The stars above the spiral arm burned faint and thin, as though the heavens themselves had grown weary of their long vigil. Once, this world beneath had been a jewel of the Imperium, its hive cities stretching like titanic cathedrals toward the void, its manufactoria groaning with the endless labor of men who believed their sweat and blood held meaning. Now the spires sagged, their lights dimmed, and the air carried a taste of rust and ash, like the faint breath of a forge left unattended. The opening of our tale is not merely the fall of a world, but the shadow of something far older, far hungrier, a hunger that even time itself could not diminish. Across the void, tendrils of a vast and unseen presence stirred, their thoughts neither god nor beast, but something more absolute, the hive mind. And yet here, upon the weary ground of a single world, the story begins smaller, in whispers, in families, in choices that will bleed into betrayal and ruin. And before we descend fully into that story, know this: we truly care for you. Whoever you are, wherever you rest tonight, your presence here matters. Before we begin the long journey into hunger and betrayal, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it there? Now let's get started. The first light of dawn cut through the smog of the hive capital like a knife, pale and merciless. Governor Malchi Dravian stood upon his balcony, looking across the rooftops and skeletal bridges that spanned the gulf between towers. The silence was wrong, not the peaceful hush of morning, but the smothered quiet of a city that had learned to keep its secrets close. He could not remember the last time he heard the miners' hymns rising at shift's start, or the laughter of children echoing through the lower plazas. What he heard now were only echoes of hammers in the deep, and even those sounded muffled, as though the earth swallowed them too quickly. A report lay on his table behind him. Numbers, always numbers. Falling productivity, increasing disappearances, unexplained absences in the militia rosters. The administratum would scrawl it all in red ink: inefficiency, dereliction, corruption. But Malchi knew it was something else. He had seen the eyes of his people, their sudden devotion, their quiet gatherings in the dust of the underhives. They spoke of salvation, not in words he could fully grasp, but in fervent whispers that clung to the air long after he passed. They called themselves children of the Star-Father. His hands gripped the stone balustrade, knuckles whitening. The Star-Father was not the Emperor. That much he knew with every drop of blood in his veins. Yet when he tried to root out these gatherings, he found nothing. Priests vanished, enforcers turned back at closed doors, and entire blocks of habstacks swore loyalty to unseen leaders who never showed their faces. The cult was no longer rumor. It was marrow deep in the world, hidden in veins too narrow for his rule to enter. A voice stirred behind him. "Governor, the council awaits." He turned. At the doorway stood his brother Kalin, clad in the robes of the planetary clergy. His face was pale, his eyes sunk deep in shadow. Malchi searched his brother's expression and felt an unease he could not name. Once, Kalin had thundered the Emperor's light from every pulpit, had carried the zeal of the faithful like a flame. Now his words were softer, quieter, almost tender when he spoke of devotion, too tender. "I will attend," Malchi replied, his voice low, as though afraid the morning air itself would carry it to ears he did not trust. They descended together through the gilded corridors, yet the silence between them was heavier than the stone. Malchi remembered the nights of their youth, when Kalin had whispered prayers beside him, swearing eternal loyalty to the Imperium. Those memories felt distant, like relics in a glass case, fragile and untouchable. He wondered what prayers his brother whispered now. The council chamber was filled with stale incense and cold light. Advisors, commanders, scribes, all wore the same strained faces, yet Malky sensed something more beneath their eyes. They bowed, they spoke their oaths, they recited the necessary reports, but the words carried no fire. They were shells of duty, filled with something else that shifted beneath their tongues. As they discussed quotas and defences, Malky's mind wandered. He thought of the mines beneath the surface, stretching for miles into the stone, where whole generations toiled without seeing the sky. It was there the whispers began. It was there the children of the Starfather found their first followers. They promised deliverance from toil, freedom from chains, and the miners, broken and weary, clutched at those promises like drowning men. When the council adjourned, Malky lingered in the empty chamber, staring at the hololithic map of the hive. Tiny red markers pulsed where incidents had occurred. Collapsed tunnels, lost patrols, fires in the night. Each marker was a wound, but none told the whole truth. He felt it in his bones. The real wound lay deeper, in hearts already turned away from him. Kaelin remained behind as well. "You cannot stop it, brother," he said quietly. "The people have chosen." Malky turned sharply. Chosen what? To live, to be free of endless chains, to join something greater than themselves. The words cut deeper than any blade. "You speak as if you believe in them," Malky whispered. Kaelin's gaze held his unflinching. "Perhaps I do." Silence stretched. The map flickered, its crimson lights dancing across their faces. Malky felt the floor tilt beneath him, not from stone, but from blood, from memory. His brother, his last true kin, standing on the edge of betrayal. He wanted to rage, to strike, to call him traitor. Instead, he only asked, "And what of the Emperor?" Kaelin's answer was a whisper, so faint that it seemed to belong to the walls themselves. "Perhaps the Emperor is not the only father." That night, the governor walked alone upon the high bridges, wind scraping cold against his skin. He thought of loyalty, how fragile, how fleeting it was. He thought of immortality, of whispers promising deliverance through a bond not of faith, but of flesh and alien seed. And he thought of betrayal, not as a sudden dagger in the dark, but as a slow turning of hearts, so subtle one never knew the moment it began. In the distance, lightning rippled across the polluted skies. For an instant, the clouds opened, and Malky saw the stars burning faintly, too faint, as if the galaxy itself withheld its light, preparing for something vast and terrible that stirred beyond mortal sight. He closed his eyes, and in that darkness he thought he heard a sound, low, distant, like the heartbeat of a leviathan moving in the void. The world was changing, slipping through his grasp like sand, and Malky knew with cold certainty that his empire was already crumbling. The choice was no longer whether he could save it. The choice was whether he could save himself from what waited in the shadows. The underhive breathed differently than the towers above. Down here, beneath layers of stone and steel, the air was thick with mineral dust, damp with the sweat of unending labour, and charged with a strange expectancy, as though the earth itself listened for voices it longed to hear. The miners moved like shadows through tunnels illuminated only by flickering lumen strips, their faces pale with exhaustion, their eyes strangely bright with something more than faith. It was here the whispers took root. It was here the first hymns to the Starfather were sung in silence. lips moving without sound, hearts beating in synchrony with something that pulsed far deeper than the planet's core. Governor Malchi Dravian descended into this world rarely, but tonight he stood in a freight elevator, descending through levels that smelled of oil, rust, and faint incense. He told no one of his journey, not even Kalen, for he feared what truths his brother might already know. A handful of loyal guards flanked him, each uncertain, each glancing into shadows with hands tense on their weapons. They, too, had heard rumors. Men refusing shifts to gather in caverns. Women abandoning homes to kneel in silence before crude shrines carved into the rock. None of the guards spoke. Silence had become a currency more valuable than coin. When the elevator shuddered to a halt, Malchi stepped into a wide cavern lined with old mining machinery, its teeth rusted, its engines silent. Here, where industry had once roared, hundreds now knelt in eerie stillness. They faced a broken column of stone upon which sat nothing more than a shard of glass, glowing faintly with phosphorescent fungus. And yet, in the eyes of those gathered, that shard shone brighter than the Emperor's light itself. They did not chant, did not sing. They only stared, breath held, as if waiting for a sign no outsider could comprehend. Malchi felt the air thicken around him, heavy with reverence. He motioned his guards to hold back, then stepped forward alone. His boots echoed on stone, and at that sound, hundreds of heads turned in unison. The sight froze his blood. Their faces were human, yes, but their gaze was not. The devotion there was absolute, unshakable, terrifying in its quiet. He knew at once that fear would not bend them, nor would threats of imperial sanction. They had already given themselves to something greater. From the crowd, a figure rose. Cloaked in rags, its hood shadowed its features, but Malchi caught the faint gleam of eyes that reflected the glow unnaturally. The figure raised a hand, and the crowd bent lower, pressing foreheads to stone as though the gesture itself had weight. "Governor," the figure said softly, the voice feminine yet layered, carrying an undertone like chitin scraping against chitin. "We welcome you to the embrace of the Starfather." Malchi's throat tightened. "These are my people," he said, his voice trembling between command and plea. "You turn them against the Emperor, against their own blood." "They turn themselves," she replied, stepping closer. Her hood fell back just enough for him to see the faint ridge of bone across her brow, the subtle widening of her eyes, the too sharp line of her smile. Not entirely human, and yet still carrying the memory of what once was. "We do not force, we only awaken. The Emperor demands labor and silence. The Starfather gives freedom and eternity. Which would you choose?" The crowd stirred, their breath rising together like wind through hollow caverns. Malchi saw men who once worked his factories, women who once begged for grain outside his gates, children whose hands had blistered in endless toil. Their devotion cut him deeper than hatred could, for in their eyes he saw not rebellion, but peace, the peace of those who believed they had been delivered. "I will not allow this," he whispered, though the words felt thin against the weight of their gaze. The woman tilted her head, her strange eyes reflecting his face back at him. "You cannot stop what is already written in blood and soil. We are the seed. The Starfather is the root. Even now his will stirs in the void. Do you not feel it?" And in that moment, Malchi did feel it. A pressure at the edge of his mind, a subtle pull, as though the air itself carried thought. He staggered, clutching the railing of an old drill rig, trying to steady himself. The sound that followed was no voice, yet it was more intimate than speech. A rhythm, a pulse, A call from beyond the stars that brushed the edges of his mind like a whisper through glass. For an instant he felt the enormity of it, a presence so vast, so consuming, that the galaxy itself seemed small within its hunger. He tore his mind away, gasping. The cavern spun, and, when he found his breath again, he saw the woman watching him with a smile that was almost tender. "You see," she said, "even you cannot resist forever." His guard stirred uneasily, fingers twitching on triggers, but Malky raised a hand, holding them back. To strike here would be to ignite something he could not control. He saw the truth now. Violence would only fuel their martyrdom. Already the cult was more than rumour. It was faith. It was family. It was survival. Malky turned without another word, forcing his step steady as he walked back toward the elevator. The crowd did not move, did not attack, did not curse him. They only watched in silence, eyes glowing faintly in the half-light, their faith stronger than any blade. As the elevator doors closed, Malky caught one final glimpse of the woman raising her hands above the shard of glass, her silhouette framed like a prophet crowned in alien fire. The ride upward was long and suffocating. The guards avoided his eyes, though their faces betrayed the same terror he felt. Malky gripped the rail so hard his hand ached, replaying the vision in his mind. The whisper, the pressure, the infinite presence. It had not been madness. It had been real. And if it was real, then the cult was not merely a rebellion. It was an invitation to something far older than mankind. When the elevator opened into the higher levels, the night air felt thin, almost meaningless. The hive's lights blinked in patterns of duty, but Malky knew now those lights were fragile, soon to be swallowed. He staggered through empty corridors until he reached his chambers, where Kaelin waited in silence. "You saw them," Kaelin said softly. Malky's eyes burned as he faced his brother. "You knew," he whispered. Kaelin nodded, no shame in his gaze. "I tried to tell you. The Emperor's time here is over. The Starfather's time has begun." For a long moment, Malky said nothing. The words he wanted, anger, command, threats, all fell hollow in his throat. What remained was only silence, heavy and suffocating. He realized then that his brother was no longer his ally, no longer bound by blood or oath. Kaelin belonged to something else, something that had already claimed the hearts of thousands. Malky turned away, standing before the wide window that looked out across the hive sprawl. The night sky pulsed with faint lightning on the horizon, and for a heartbeat, he thought he saw something vast moving in the clouds, as if the heavens themselves strained against a presence that pressed closer with every passing hour. And in the silence of that moment, the governor understood the truth that hollowed his heart. He was no longer ruling a world. He was standing on a precipice, holding onto the last fragments of an empire already dissolving into whispers. The shadows were patient. The Starfather was coming, and the people, his people, would welcome him with the governor's chambers had once been sanctuaries of order, lined with gilded banners bearing the Aquila, each wall a testament to loyalty and permanence. Now the banners sagged in stale air, their fabrics stained with moisture that leaked through cracked stone. Malky sat alone at his desk, a single lumen casting pale light across stacked reports he could not bring himself to read. His brother's words echoed louder than any parchment. The Emperor's time is over. The Starfather's time has begun. The hours bled together as the hive beyond his window stirred with quiet unrest. He had sent emissaries to rally the priesthood, to remind them of their oaths, but only half returned. Those who did were silent, their eyes troubled, their words evasive. Priests who once thundered sermons now preached gentler homilies, soft and warm, like a caress rather than a command. Devotion was changing its shape, and the Imperium's fire, once unshakable, was cooling into embers. A knock came at the chamber door, sharp and deliberate. Malky straightened, his hand brushing instinctively toward the pistol beneath his cloak. "Enter," he called, his voice cracking with fatigue. The door opened, revealing Captain Lauren Vane, commander of the Planetary Guard. Broad-shouldered, armoured in polished plates, his presence was a rare assurance of strength. Yet even his expression was strained, the lines at his eyes carved deeper with doubt. He saluted, then stepped inside with a heaviness that told Malky this visit carried no victory. "My lord," Loran began, voice low, "we intercepted a gathering in the Mid-Habs last night. A congregation of more than 300. They carried no weapons, but they prayed, not to him on Terra. They spoke of the Starfather. They begged us to join." Malky's stomach twisted. "And what did you do?" The captain hesitated. "We dispersed them. No blood spilled. But—" He paused, searching for words. "Some of my men lingered. They listened. When I ordered them back, their eyes, they looked at me as though I were the heretic, as though I had betrayed them." The silence that followed pressed like a weight between them. Malky realized the infection was not only among the miners or priests. It had reached his soldiers. His shield, his last line of defense, was cracking from within. "Do you still have their loyalty?" Malky asked, the question sharp as a blade. Loran's jaw tightened. "Most, perhaps. Enough to act if given clear command. But if the cult spreads further—" His voice fell. "I cannot promise every order will be obeyed." Malky rose from his chair, moving to the wide window that stretched across the chamber. The city lay sprawling below, its towers shrouded in fog, its streets dim with failing power. He saw clusters of torchlight where processions moved through alleys, their shapes barely visible. They were not riots, not yet. They were something worse. Processions of faith, quiet and unshakable, growing bolder with each passing night. "They worship death," Malky muttered, his voice cold. "They offer themselves to something that will devour them whole, and they welcome it as salvation." Loran stepped closer, his boots echoing against stone. "Then we must decide, Governor. Strike now, while their gatherings are still mortal in size. Burn the tunnels, purge the leaders, or—" His voice hardened. "Or wait, and let them drown us from within." The choice gnawed at Malky. To order slaughter would mean fire in his own streets, blood of his own citizens. But to wait was to invite collapse. He thought of Kalen, of the way his brother's eyes had gleamed in the half-light of heresy. To strike would mean to strike against him as well. Blood not only of strangers, but of kin. Before Malky could answer, the chamber door creaked open again. A young courier stumbled inside, robes torn, face streaked with soot. He fell to his knees, gasping, words spilling in broken fragments. Governor, uprising, lower manufactoria, flames, enforcers overwhelmed, chanting the Starfather's name. Malky closed his eyes. The spark had already caught flame. Loran's hand went to his blade. "Give the order," he demanded. "If we move swiftly, we can still contain it." But Malky's voice, when it came, was hollow. "No. To slaughter them now would only feed their martyrdom. They would call it sacrifice, not defeat." "Then what do you command?" Loran pressed, frustration sharp in his tone. Malky turned slowly, his gaze haunted. "Watch, wait, and find me the names of those who lead them. If we strike, it must be upon the head, not the body. The captain hesitated, then bowed stiffly, though doubt lingered in his eyes. As you will, my lord. When the two men left, Malky remained alone again, staring into the fog. His reflection in the glass looked hollow, pale, his features carved with the weight of indecision. He thought of the woman in the cavern, the faint ridge across her brow, the way her words had slid into his mind like a knife wrapped in velvet. You cannot resist forever. Night fell heavy, and with it came the sound of distant hymns, carried upward through ventilation shafts and hollow streets. Malky wandered the balconies of his palace, listening to voices that rose in waves, low at first, then swelling with fervour. They were not the hymns of the ecclesiarchy. They were gentler, stranger, and yet they stirred the air with an intensity that unsettled his blood. At the far end of the balcony, a shadow moved. Malky froze, his hand on his pistol, until a figure stepped into the dim light. Kalen. His brother stood with robes unfastened, the faint gleam of strange jewellery at his throat, shaped like an alien star. His eyes glimmered with unearthly calm. You hear them, don't you? Kalen asked softly. They sing not of chains, but of promise, not of an emperor who has never seen them, but of a father who will walk among them. Do you not envy their peace? Malky's breath caught. Peace built on surrender is not peace. It is death. Kalen stepped closer, his voice quiet, almost pleading. Is it death to become part of something eternal? Is it betrayal to seek freedom where the Imperium offers only chains? You call it heresy, but I call it truth. Brother, the Starfather is coming, and when he arrives, those who resist will be nothing more than dust beneath his tread. Malky's hand trembled on the pistol, but he could not raise it. The blood they shared held him still, even as Kalen's words cut into his marrow. His brother leaned close, his breath warm against his ear. Choose carefully, Malky, for the day will come soon when you must stand among them or stand against them. And on that day, blood will decide, not words. With that, Kalen slipped back into the shadows, leaving Malky alone on the balcony, the hymns swelling below like a tide rising against the cliffs. The governor's gaze lifted to the night sky, where faint lightning once more rippled across the clouds. For a heartbeat, he swore he saw movement beyond the stars, a vast silhouette pressing closer, unseen yet undeniable. And in that vision, terror and inevitability coiled together like a single truth. The Starfather was not a myth. He was real, and he was coming. The Manufactoria fires burned for 3 days before the smoke began to choke the upper towers. At first, reports arrived in fragments. Work stoppages, machinery sabotaged, overseers vanished without trace. By the time Malky's enforcers reached the lower levels, the fires were no longer accidents, but symbols. Great spirals of ash were painted across the walls, crude but deliberate, resembling constellations that did not belong to any imperial chart. The people sang as they worked. Voices joined in a slow and wordless hymn, and the flames became their altar. Malky stood before the strategium table as red markers spread across the hive's lower strata, each pulsing like an infection beneath skin. Captain Lauren delivered the report with restrained fury, his gauntleted fist clenched so tight it trembled. They do not scatter when confronted. They kneel, they smile, they let themselves burn rather than yield. My men are shaken. They cannot comprehend such devotion. Malky traced one of the crimson marks with his hand, the hololithic glow casting sharp shadows across his face. They do not see fire as punishment, he murmured. They see it as offering. Loran's voice hardened. Then let us answer devotion with steel, permission to storm the manufactoria and cut their leaders down. The governor looked up, his eyes weary. He thought of Kaelin's whisper on the balcony, the quiet conviction in his voice. The Starfather is coming. Stand with us or stand against us. To strike now would mean turning sword against his own brother, for Malky knew with cold certainty that Kaelin's hands guided these flames. Yet to delay would mean letting the infection spread beyond recall. Not yet, Malky said, the words tasting of ash. If we slaughter them, we give them their martyrdom. If we wait, perhaps we find their heart and strike it cleanly. Loran's teeth ground audibly, but he bowed. As you command, my lord, but time is not our ally. That night, the governor walked the high bridges once more, drawn by the strange glow that rose from the underhive. The smoke had climbed into the upper air, staining the stars with a veil of black. Processions wound through the streets below, torches moving like rivers of fire, their paths converging toward hidden sanctuaries where hymns echoed against stone. Malky felt the vibration in his bones, a resonance that was not music, but something older, deeper, as though the planet itself hummed in anticipation of a vast arrival. He returned to his chambers and found Kaelin waiting, robed in crimson fabric that caught the firelight. His eyes gleamed brighter than the torches, and at his throat the alien sigil shone with faint phosphorescence. You see it now, Kaelin said softly. The old order crumbles. The Emperor's silence has left us hollow. But here, in this fire, the people have found a voice. Do you not feel it? Malky's voice was hoarse. I feel only ruin. His brother stepped closer, his tone low and intimate. No, brother. You feel the birth of something greater. The Starfather's call reaches all hearts, even yours. You fight it, but it is there. I see it in your eyes. Malky turned away, but Kaelin's words gnawed at him. He could not deny the pressure in his mind, the subtle rhythm that sometimes thrummed behind his thoughts like a heartbeat not his own. He feared to name it, for to name it was to admit its reality. The next day, Malky summoned a secret council of his most trusted officers. Only 5 came, men and women whose loyalty he still dared believe in. They gathered in a candlelit chamber beneath the palace, away from ears that might betray them. The air smelled of damp stone, and every whisper seemed to cling to the walls. We are losing the hive, Loran said bluntly. Every day more of my men turn. Some vanish in the night, others refuse to fire when ordered. Soon we will be outnumbered, even in the guard. A scribe named Elira leaned forward, her ink-stained fingers trembling. It is not just the soldiers. The administratum clerks have begun altering records, erasing names, rewriting shipments to cover what the cult takes. They spread like shadow, reshaping truth itself. An older woman, Commander Vera of the Arbites, spoke next. Then exterminatus will come. The Imperium will not hesitate to burn us all if they sense infection. We must cleanse this world before the Inquisition learns the depth of our corruption. Her words hung heavy. Malky felt the weight of them pressing against his lungs. Exterminados. The word itself was a death knell. Millions would burn, loyal and heretic alike, reduced to ash to save the Imperium from contamination. His world, his people, erased by a single command. I will not see my world burned, Malky said at last, his voice shaking. Not while I still draw breath. Then act, Vera urged. Strike at the cult's leaders. Tear the infection out before it consumes the whole body. But Malky faltered. The image of Kaelin's eyes, calm and fervent, haunted him. Could he order his brother's death? Could he raise blade against the last blood of his family? before he could answer, a tremor rippled through the chamber. Dust sifted from the ceiling. Candles flickered. The walls themselves groaned, as though the planet had exhaled. All froze in silence until the shaking subsided, and in that silence they heard it, faint, distant, yet unmistakable. A sound not of stone nor machine, but of something vast and alive resonating through the earth. A pulse, a heartbeat. Illyra's face blanched. "It is here already," she whispered, "beneath us, waiting." Panic flickered in the eyes of the officers, but Malky steadied himself against the table, forcing his voice calm. "Hold fast. We are not yet lost. We still command the towers, the gates, the skies. If the Starfather comes, he will find us unbroken." Yet even as he spoke, doubt gnawed at him. The tremor had felt alive, not mere shifting stone, and within him that subtle rhythm pulsed again, stronger now, answering the echo in the earth. When the council dispersed, Malky remained in the chamber alone. He pressed his hands to the cold stone, closing his eyes. The silence stretched long, until he heard a whisper. Not Kaelin's, not the woman's, but something vaster, deeper. A thought not his own, sliding across his mind like the brush of an ocean wave. "We are coming." He recoiled, breath ragged, yet the whisper lingered, resonating through his skull, through his bones. He stumbled into the corridors above, into the dim light of the palace halls, and saw shadows moving where no torch burned. For a moment he thought he saw faces in the dark, too pale, too wide-eyed, watching him with devotion that was not worship of him, but of something beyond. Malky pressed his back to the wall, his heart hammering. His world was slipping, his people already lost to whispers, and in his marrow he knew the truth he could not yet speak aloud. The Starfather's shadow had already fallen across them. The question was not whether they would fall, but how long he could pretend they still stood. The palace had grown quieter with each passing night, not with peace, but with the hollow silence of abandonment. Servants once bustling through corridors had vanished. Guards who had sworn eternal loyalty were now absent from their posts. Malky walked the halls alone, his footsteps echoing in vast chambers that felt more mausoleum than seat of rule. The tapestries of the Imperium stared down from the walls like ghosts. Their aquilas faded, their woven saints dimmed by dust and neglect. He felt watched, but not by eyes of flesh, rather by something vast and unseen, brushing against his mind like a predator circling prey. From the balconies, he saw the hive below, its fires spreading like veins of molten iron through the underhive, its towers wrapped in smoke. The processions grew bolder now, no longer confined to shadows. By torchlight they wound up toward the mid-levels, faces painted with ash, voices lifted in hymns too low for words. He had ordered them dispersed, but his guards had hesitated. Some dropped their weapons, some joined the march. Others simply turned and walked away, as if pulled by an invisible thread. In the council chamber, Captain Loran stood rigid, his armour scarred from riots already fought and lost. He placed his helm upon the table with a weight that seemed to drag the room down with it. "My lord," he said, voice hollow, "another 2 barracks have turned. Men we trusted, men who swore by oath and blood. They vanished in the night. When dawn came, they walked with the processions." Malky's chest tightened. "And the Arbites?" "Fractured," Loran admitted. "Vera still holds her precinct, but the others are compromised. Whole cells have defected. They claim loyalty to something greater than the throne. They call themselves heralds of the new dawn." The words clawed into Malky's skull. "They are heralds of their own annihilation," he spat, though his anger rang hollow, more brittle than steel. Loran's gaze was grim. The infection spreads faster than any fire I have seen. It does not weaken as it consumes, it strengthens. They do not cower, they do not fear death. Every strike against them only fuels their resolve. Malky lowered his head into his hands, fingers digging into his temples. He had thought himself a ruler, but now he felt little more than a man swept by tides he could neither predict nor command. Beneath his despair lurked a darker truth, the rhythm in his blood, the pulse he could not silence. It grew stronger each day, a heartbeat within his own, foreign and yet intimate, whispering that resistance was futility. That night, Kalen came again. He entered the chamber unbidden, robes flowing like liquid flame in the candlelight. His face was serene, his eyes bright with conviction that cut through Malky's soul. "You sit in silence while the world awakens," Kalen said gently, as if speaking not to an enemy, but to a stubborn child. "Why fight what you cannot unmake? The Starfather is not invasion, brother. He is inheritance. He is the destiny we were always meant to embrace." Malky's voice cracked with exhaustion. Inheritance through slavery. Destiny through devouring. I see only death. Kalen moved closer, his shadow stretching across the floor. "No, you see through chains forged by fear. You have served the Imperium all your life, a master who never once spoke your name. The Starfather speaks in every breath, every heart, every pulse beneath your skin. Do you not hear him? Do you not feel his embrace?" Malky did not answer, for he could not. The truth was too dangerous to name. He did feel it, the whisper, the pull, the presence that had already seeped into his marrow. But to admit it was to betray himself, and so he remained silent, staring at the floor as if stone might shield him from inevitability. Kalen knelt before him, placing a hand on his brother's arm. The touch was warm, too warm, as though blood itself ran differently in his veins. "You are not our enemy, Malky. You are our hope. The people still look to you even now. If you stand with us, the transition will be merciful. If you resist, you will be remembered only as a relic of the old chains." Malky's heart ached. For a fleeting moment he saw them as children again, kneeling side by side in prayer to the Emperor, whispering vows of loyalty. The memory felt fragile, crumbling in his grasp. He whispered only, "Leave me." Kalen rose, his expression sorrowful, yet resolute. "When the time comes, brother, you will choose. And when you do, know that the Starfather already waits for you. He waits for us all." He left in silence, the chamber colder in his absence. Malky did not sleep. Instead, he walked the palace walls until dawn, staring into smoke-choked skies. When the sun broke through the haze, it was pale, sickly, like a star already dying. Beneath it, processions still moved, banners raised, their symbols crude yet carried with pride. The Aquila banners of the Imperium had been torn down in districts across the hive, replaced by spirals, constellations, and alien shapes painted in blood. By midday, another report came. The eastern gate had fallen without a fight. The enforcers guarding it had opened the way themselves, allowing hundreds of cultists to pour into the city's heart. They carried no siege engines, no weapons of war, only faith, and yet their march was unstoppable. Malky summoned Loran once more. The captain arrived bloodied, his armor blackened with soot, his eyes heavy with despair. He saluted, though the gesture was weak, more habit than loyalty. "We cannot hold them," he admitted, his voice raw. "Not with force, not with fear. They come like a tide, and every soul they touch becomes theirs. If this continues, my lord, you will have no soldiers left to command." Malky's voice was low, almost broken. Then what is left to us? Loran hesitated, then drew a long breath. Exterminatus, he said at last, his words falling like a blade. Send word to the Segmentum authorities. Declare this world lost. Beg the fleet to cleanse it before the infection spreads. The governor staggered back as if struck. The word hung in the air, a sentence heavier than death. To call it was to condemn every life. Loyal and heretic, child and soldier, all reduced to ash in holy fire. It would erase his world, his people, everything he had ever been entrusted to protect. Yet even as the thought horrified him, another whisper stirred within. Better ash than hunger. Better silence than the endless swarm. Malky gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. His voice trembled. Not yet, not until all hope is gone. But in his heart, he knew hope was already nothing more than a memory. The Starfather's shadow loomed larger with each passing hour. His brother's words echoed once more. When the time comes, you will choose. Malky lifted his gaze to the ceiling, hearing the faint tremor in the stone, the pulse that throbbed through the planet's bones. And he realized, with a dread that hollowed him to the core, that the choice would not be his alone to make. The Starfather was already choosing for them. The hive no longer slept. Night and day had lost their meaning, replaced by the constant rhythm of processions, hymns, and fire. From his tower, Malky watched as rivers of torchlight wound through the streets below, splitting and merging, converging upon the manufactoria and the gutted plazas where once imperial statues had stood. Those statues now lay shattered, their faces ground to dust, their wings broken beneath the boots of the faithful. In their place, crude icons rose, spirals of stone and bone, their forms suggesting constellations that bent toward a center no mortal astronomer had charted. The people bowed before them as if before altars, their foreheads pressed to the ground, their bodies trembling not with fear but with fervor. Malky had ceased giving orders. Each decree he signed was ignored before it left the palace. Couriers vanished, guards defected, administrators refused his seal. The machinery of rule had slipped away, hollowed out and replaced with whispers. He still wore the sigil of his office, but it meant nothing now. He was a governor only in name, a relic presiding over a world that no longer believed in the throne. At dawn, Captain Loran arrived once more, his armor scarred, his expression bleak. He moved like a man who carried death in his shadow. Another gate has fallen, he said, without preamble. The southern entrance. My men swore they would hold, but at the first sight of the processions, they laid down arms and joined them. I have less than 1,000 loyalists left, and even they are shaken. Some whisper prayers I do not recognize when they think I cannot hear. Malky's voice rasped. And the Arbites? Vera holds still, but her precinct is surrounded. She sends word hourly, begging for support. She will not last. The governor turned from the window, staring into Loran's worn eyes. If we abandon her, she will die. If we move to rescue her, we walk into the teeth of the cult. Loran bowed his head. It is no longer a choice of victories, my lord. It is only a choice of deaths. The words cut deep, yet Malky found no strength to deny them. He dismissed the captain and remained at the window long after, watching the smoke curl upward like offerings to a vast and unseen god. At nightfall, Kalin came again. He entered the chambers as though they were his own, unchallenged by guards who no longer stood their watch. His robes shimmered with faint dust that glowed softly, as though he had walked through caverns filled with starlight. The sigil at his throat pulsed with a rhythm that made Malky's stomach twist, for it seemed to echo the hidden beat that had haunted his own veins for weeks. "You are weary," Kalen said, his voice warm, gentle. "The burden of rule has broken you. Lay it down, brother. Join us. The Star Father does not demand service without reward. He gives unity, eternity, freedom from the endless toil of false masters." Malky's voice cracked. "Unity in death, eternity as fodder. You mistake consumption for salvation." Kalen smiled faintly. "Is the river diminished when it joins the sea? Is the flame extinguished when it feeds the fire? No, brother. It becomes greater, unending. So too will we." Malky's hand trembled on the hilt of his pistol. He wanted to raise it, to silence this voice that corroded everything he once believed. Yet he could not. The bond of blood still stayed his hand, and worse, the whisper in his marrow told him that Kalen was not wrong, that perhaps the Emperor's silence truly was abandonment, that perhaps the hive mind's embrace was the only answer to the emptiness. "You speak as if I still have a choice," Malky whispered. Kaelin's smile deepened, sorrowful and kind. "You do not. None of us do. The choice was made when the first seed touched the soil of this world. Now we only decide how we meet what comes, with fear or with faith." He left then, his steps silent, his presence lingering like a shadow, even after the doors closed. Malky sank to his knees before the cold stone of his chamber floor, his breath shallow, his chest tight. The pulse in his skull grew louder, steadier, until it seemed to replace the rhythm of his own heart. He pressed his palms against his ears, but the sound was within, not without. That night, the dreams came. He saw oceans of flesh stretching across the void, tides of chitin and claw rising like waves against the stars. He saw worlds stripped to bone in hours, their cities swallowed whole, their skies blackened by wings. He saw himself not as man, not as governor, but as part of it, his flesh dissolving into the tide, his mind melting into the choir. It was horror, but it was also peace, the peace of no longer being alone, of no longer carrying burdens. When he woke, his sheets were soaked with sweat, his body trembling with both terror and longing. At dawn, reports arrived of the Arbite's precinct's fall. Vera's last message was short, her voice steady even as the sounds of chanting rose behind her. "Governor," she said, "the law is ended here. The father claims his due." Then the vox fell silent, and no more was heard. Malky sat in his chamber, the message echoing in his mind. One by one, the pillars of the Imperium were crumbling, and he remained, a single figure clutching at fragments. He thought of Exterminatus again, the cleansing fire that could erase all of this before it reached beyond his world. But to call it down would be to kill Kalen, to kill the children he had seen in the processions, to kill everyone. He found himself unable to even form the words, though the Voxling sat waiting at his desk. Instead, he walked once more to the balcony at dusk. The sky burned with the glow of the fires below, the stars hidden behind smoke. The hymns rose louder now, no longer secret, no longer ashamed. The sound was vast, unbroken, echoing across the towers like the voice of a single mind. For the first time, Malky felt himself swaying to its rhythm, his lips moving before he realized, forming words he did not know yet understood. He froze, horrified at himself, but the whisper in his veins laughed softly, tenderly. In the streets below, the processions parted, and from the depths of the underhive something new emerged. Figures cloaked in robes carried a great shape upon their shoulders, a statue carved of bone and stone, its face inhuman yet strangely beautiful. crowned with spirals that reached toward the stars. The people fell prostrate before it, their bodies trembling, their voices rising in ecstasy. Malky gripped the railing until his hands bled. He should have called for fire, for steel, for anything to cut this madness down. But no order left his lips. He only watched as the statue was raised high in the plaza, as though marking the heart of a new empire. The pulse in his skull beat faster, stronger. And deep within, a voice he could no longer deny whispered to him as clearly as Kaelan ever had. "We are near." Malky closed his eyes, the sound of the hymns carrying him towards something vast and inevitable. For the first time, he realized he was no longer certain which fate he feared more, exterminatus, or the embrace of the Starfather. The sky above the hive was no longer the firmament of man. Smoke coiled in great pillars, obscuring the stars, while distant thunder rolled without storm. It was not weather that stirred the heavens, but the tremor of void shadows pressing closer, unseen yet undeniable. Malky felt it in his bones with every breath. The air itself carried weight, as if the world lay beneath the slow descent of something colossal. He no longer needed Kaelan's words to tell him. The Starfather's children had crossed the gulf of stars. They were near. Reports trickled in, more rumour than fact. Entire districts now answered to the cult openly. Their banners of spirals hung from balconies where once the Aquila had flown. Enforcer patrols vanished without trace. Vox lines carried not orders but hymns, voices woven together until they formed a single unbroken chant. Some said these faithful could not die, that when struck down, they rose again with eyes brighter than before, voices louder in their devotion. Others whispered of shapes glimpsed in the depths of the tunnels, pale forms, four-armed shadows, glimpses of claws scraping stone. In the governor's chambers, Captain Lauren delivered his latest report with a grim resignation. His armour bore new scars, his shoulders stooped under the burden of failure. "We cannot hold the mid-hive," he admitted. "My men fought to bar the ascension routes, but the cultists did not fight us. They swarmed past, unafraid of death. We cut down hundreds, but more poured through, chanting, smiling, bleeding without fear. It is like trying to hold back the tide with bare hands." Malky stared into the flickering hololith before him, red markers spreading like blood across the map. He felt as though the city itself was dissolving in front of him, stone giving way to ash, faith giving way to hunger. His voice was hoarse when he asked, "And the palace?" "For now," Loran replied, "but even here whispers grow. Some of the guard are already gone. Others pray when they think I do not see. It will not be long before they turn." The words hollowed him, yet he could not deny their truth. His palace was not a fortress. It was a carcass waiting to be consumed. That evening, Malky walked the high walls alone, the city sprawling beneath like a fever dream. He watched torchlit processions wind through the avenues, heard the rolling chant that rose like ocean surf. Then, from the smoke, a different sound carried to him, a roar, vast and alien, reverberating through the stone beneath his feet. The people below fell prostrate in ecstasy, arms raised toward the darkened heavens. Malky clutched the parapet, his heart pounding as the sound grew. Neither storm nor machine, but a cry of something alive, immense and nearer with every moment. Kaelan came to him as the sound faded, robes glowing faint in the firelight. His face was serene, luminous, with a certainty that made Malky's blood run cold. "You hear it now," Kaelan said. "Not whispers, not dreams. His heralds stir the heavens. Soon they will descend, and we shall be remade." Malky's voice broke. This is annihilation, not rebirth. Do you still cling to that word? Kaelin's smile was sorrowful. Look at them. He gestured to the processions below, thousands upon thousands kneeling as one. Do you see fear? No. They are free at last, free of chains, free of silence, free of the Emperor who never answered. In the Star Father's embrace, they have found eternity. Malky wanted to scream, to rage, to strike his brother down. But he could not, for his heart betrayed him. Deep within, beneath the terror, he felt the same pull, the same rhythm, the same longing. It horrified him, yet it was real. The whisper had become a voice, and the voice was no longer content to linger at the edges of his mind. Later, that night, sleep abandoned him. He wandered the palace halls until he found himself in the abandoned chapel of the Emperor. Once it had been filled with incense and hymns. Now dust lay thick across the altar, and the statues of saints stared blankly through cracked stone. The aquila above the altar had been defaced, its wings clawed away by knives or nails. In its place, someone had carved a spiral, rough but deliberate, curling inward toward a center that seemed to draw the eye like a vortex. Malky sank to his knees before it, his breath ragged. "Emperor," he whispered, though his voice trembled with doubt, "have I been forsaken? Are you silent because you cannot hear, or because you never cared?" His words echoed, hollow, unanswered. Only the spiral stared back at him, its crude lines glowing faintly in the candlelight, as though the stone itself pulsed with life. He pressed his hands to his head, desperate to silence the rhythm in his skull, but it only grew louder, steadier, until he felt his own heartbeat falter in its shadow. And then he heard it again, clear as Kaelin's voice, but vaster, deeper. "We are near. You are ours." He gasped and staggered back, clutching the railing of the pews. His vision blurred, the chapel swaying, until he thought he saw movement in the shadows. Shapes too thin, too long, skittered across the corners of his sight. He blinked, but they were gone. The silence that followed was heavier than prayer, more suffocating than air. When dawn came, the first reports of open battle reached him. The cultists had surged through the mid-hive, overwhelming the last bastions of imperial loyalists. Not through arms alone, but through betrayal. Whole squads had laid down weapons and joined the tide mid-battle, turning on comrades without hesitation. In hours, what remained of order collapsed. Loran came one final time, his armor cracked, his face bloodied. He fell to one knee before Malky, not in loyalty, but in exhaustion. "We cannot hold," he said. "Not the palace, not the hive, not the world. There is no hope left. Send the call. Beg for exterminatus before it is too late." The governor's hand trembled over the Vox console. The words hung in his throat like a blade. To call exterminatus was to condemn Kaelin, to condemn every child, every voice, every soul. To remain silent was to let the world dissolve into the swarm. He lifted his gaze to Loran, whose eyes were hollow, desperate. Then to the window, where smoke rose like banners, where chants rolled like thunder, where the horizon itself seemed to ripple with movement. Malky's lips parted, but no sound emerged, for in that moment he felt the presence press closer, vast and undeniable, filling the chamber like a second atmosphere. His hand hovered over the Vox, torn between damnation and surrender. And then, from the distance, a great shadow broke the clouds. Wings vast as cities spread across the heavens, their edges aglow with reflected fire. The roar returned, shaking the stones, rattling the air, filling every soul with terror or ecstasy. The people below screamed in joy, falling prostrate, their cries blending into one unbroken hymn. Malky clutched the console, the voice within his mind drowning every thought. We are here. And in that terrible moment, he knew the choice had already been made. The first sight of them was not claws or teeth, but shadow. Great shapes passed above the hive, blotting out what stars remained, their outlines blurred by smoke and cloud. The air thickened with a pressure that bent stone and shook glass from towers. People poured into the streets, their torches extinguished in awe as they raised their hands to the heavens, their chants swelling until the hive itself seemed to vibrate with a single voice. The Starfather's children had come, and all resistance was drowned in the tide of worship. Malky stood on the palace balcony, his knuckles white on the railing as he watched wings vast as cities eclipse the skies. They moved with a grace too vast for their size, living continents of chitin and flesh, their bellies writhing with shapes not yet birthed. Lightning danced across the clouds where their bodies scraped the atmosphere, illuminating moors lined with teeth too numerous to count. The sight hollowed him, awe and terror woven into one. This was no invasion, it was revelation, and his people embraced it as though salvation had finally descended. Beside him, Kaelin knelt, his robes fluttering in the unnatural winds. His arms stretched upward, his voice a cry of joy. Do you see now, brother? The Emperor was silent, but the Starfather speaks in thunder. We are chosen, beloved, embraced. His face glowed with ecstasy, tears streaking his cheeks. Malky wanted to shout, to deny, but his throat closed around the words. He did see. He saw it with every sense, felt it in the marrow of his bones. The hive mind's presence pressed into him, a vast weight of thought so absolute that his own seemed like dust. For one horrifying moment, he felt the edges of its awareness brush his own, cold and endless. A tide of minds bound into one. It was hunger, yes, but it was also certainty, unity, the annihilation of doubt. Behind him, Captain Loran burst into the chamber, his armor torn, his face smeared with blood. He staggered forward, gasping. My lord, the gates are gone. The cult has thrown them open. The swarm will be upon us before nightfall. Send the call. Beg for exterminatus before the fleet is lost to delay. His eyes were wild, desperate, the last flame of defiance in a world already surrendered. Malky turned slowly, his lips trembling. Exterminatus. The word felt like a relic, small and powerless in the presence of what loomed above. He looked to Kaelin, still kneeling, radiant in devotion. He looked to Loran, fierce in despair. Between them he stood, torn as though the universe itself demanded his soul as tithe. The palace trembled. They roar echoed from beyond the clouds, so vast it rattled bones and split stone. The people screamed in joy. Loran fell to one knee, clutching his ears. Malky felt his vision blur, his thoughts fragment, until only the voice remained within him. You are ours. You have always been ours. The world erupted. From the smoke-choked horizon, the first of the swarm descended. Spires of living flesh plunged into the hive, their tendrils lashing outward, cracking towers like dry twigs. From their bellies poured rivers of creatures, each claw and fang a fragment of the whole, each scream a single note in the choir. Streets flooded with chitinous forms, claws scraping stone, eyes glowing with alien fire. The faithful rushed to meet them, not with fear but with open arms, their hymns rising until they drowned the sound of slaughter. They were not devoured. They were embraced, folded into the tide, their bodies torn, yet their voices joined into something greater. Loran drew his blade, his face twisted with fury. Do you see? This is no salvation. This is the end of all things. He turned to Malky, his voice breaking. Give the order. Call the fleet. Let fire cleanse what flesh cannot hold. But Malky's hand did not move. His gaze was locked on Kaelin, who rose now from his knees, his eyes shining brighter than the fires below. It is not the end, brother, Kaelin whispered. It is the beginning, the end of chains, the end of silence. Join us. Join me. Malky's vision swam. He saw Kaelin's face not as it was, but as it had been in their youth, bright, loyal, laughing beneath banners of gold. He saw his brother whisper prayers beside him, promising eternal loyalty. And he saw him now, transformed, radiant with alien conviction. The palace doors burst open. A tide of cultists surged through, their faces ecstatic, their bodies twisted with subtle mutations. Some bore claws in place of hands, others eyes too many for their skulls. They fell prostrate before Kaelin, hailing him with voices that blended into one unbroken hymn. Kaelin raised his arms, and they echoed his gesture as though he were already their prophet. Loran roared, charging forward with blade drawn, cutting into the first of them. Blood sprayed, screams echoed, but for each he felled. Two more pressed closer. Governor, he shouted, his voice a ragged plea. Choose, for throne or for swarm, but choose. Malky staggered back, the console at his side blinking with unanswered connection to the fleet. His hand hovered above it, trembling. In one motion, he could damn his world to fire, erase Kaelin, erase every child, every voice. Or he could surrender, step forward, and let himself be folded into the tide. He felt the hive mind waiting, patient, vast, certain of its triumph. Kaelin stepped toward him, the crowd parting in reverence. He extended his hand, his smile tender. Brother, no more burdens, no more silence, only unity, only peace. Malky's breath shuddered. He felt the console beneath his hand, its edge sharp against his palm. He felt the warmth of his brother's hand extended toward him. Between fire and embrace he hung, a single soul caught in the jaws of inevitability. The palace trembled again as a massive shape descended, blotting out even the smoke-choked sky. Its body scraped the towers as it lowered, its maw opening like a city gate. The hymn of the faithful rose into screams of ecstasy as the swarm poured forth in rivers of chitin and hunger. Malky closed his eyes. In the darkness, the voice filled him, vast and final. We are one. His hand fell, whether onto the console or into his brother's grasp. He did not know. For in that moment, the tide swallowed everything, and the world was no longer his to claim. The sky broke open. From horizon to horizon, vast silhouettes split the clouds, their bodies blotting the last pale stars. Biotitans descended on wings of membrane, their bellies glowing faint with birthing sacs ready to spill rivers of claws. The sound was not thunder, but something deeper, a vibration that set stone trembling, marrow quaking. To the faithful, it was music. To the few who still clung to the Imperium, it was the death knell of hope. Malky stood frozen in the great hall of the palace, the console blinking before him, Kaelin's hand extended at his side. Captain Loran fought in the doorway, each swing of his blade carving through bodies that pressed closer without fear, without hesitation. Blood pooled across the marble floor, running in rivulets toward the feet of cultists who fell and rose again, their mouths still open in ecstatic chant, even as their throats spilled red. Governor, Loran roared, his voice raw. Now, call the fleet or we are damned. He struck another down, his blade cracking bone, but his arms were slowing. The tide would consume him. Malky's hand trembled above the console, the decision a blade balanced on its edge. Exterminatus. Fire that would scour his world into nothing. Or surrender to the voice already coiling through his blood, to the unity that promised peace at the cost of self. Kaelin's eyes locked on his, bright and unflinching, filled with love twisted into alien conviction. "Brother," he whispered, as though they were boys again in prayer. "No more silence. No more chains." Malky faltered, his breath shuddering. The voice within pressed harder now, vast and calm, promising that resistance was dust. "You are ours. You have always been ours." And then the walls shook. A colossal impact thundered through the palace as one of the living spires crashed into the hive's outer shell. Towers toppled, bridges split. Screams rose as millions were buried in falling stone. The great hall itself cracked, dust falling like ash from the vaulted ceiling. The console sparked, its signal interrupted, its light flickering as if even the machine hesitated before such enormity. Malky staggered, his vision blurring. He saw Lauren dragged down beneath a flood of bodies, his blade flashing once more before disappearing in the mass. He saw Kaelin reaching for him, his face aglow, his smile tender, even as alien shadows coiled behind his shoulders. He saw the doors of the hall torn from their hinges as creatures poured through, not human now, not cultist, but the swarm itself. 4 armed shapes with claws like scythes, their bodies slick with ichor, their eyes gleaming with cold purpose. They moved as one, each step a fragment of the greater mind. The cultists fell prostrate before them, their chants rising into frenzied ecstasy. Malky could not breathe. The sight stole all thought, all choice. The voice inside was no longer a whisper. It was everywhere, in the crash of claws, in the roar of the bio-titan outside, in the very beat of his heart. "We are one. Join us." Kaelin's hand remained steady, his eyes fixed on his brother. "Take it, Malky," he said, almost gently. "Take my hand. Be free." For one suspended moment, Malky hovered between fire and embrace, between loyalty and surrender. He saw his brother's hand, warm and familiar, stretched toward him. He saw the console, its glow flickering, the last fragile tether to the Imperium. His mind screamed, his body shook, and then the hall collapsed into chaos. The swarm struck. Claws tore through marble, bodies split like parchment. The faithful were seized, lifted, devoured, yet their screams were not of terror but of joy. Their flesh became offering, their blood hymn. The creatures did not hesitate, did not falter. They fed, and as they fed, the chant did not cease. It grew louder, stronger, a choir of agony transmuted into worship. Malky stumbled backward, the console sparking before him, Kaelin's hand still waiting. Dust and smoke filled the air, choking his lungs. He reached. Whether toward brother or machine, even he did not know. His fingers brushed something, warm and alive, and in that instant the voice within him roared triumphant. The hive mind unfolded in him. His vision shattered, then reformed, expanded until he was no longer one, but many. He felt the claws of the swarm rend flesh in the great hall as though they were his own. He felt the joy of the cultists as they gave themselves willingly. He felt the hunger of the bio-titans above, the endless gnawing need that was not despair but certainty. He was Malky, governor of a crumbling world, but he was also the claw, the fang, the tide. He was all of them, and they were him. He cried out, but the cry was not his alone. It was a chorus of millions, a sound that split the palace walls, that rolled through the hive like thunder. The console beside him sparked one final time, its transmission cut short, its call for fire lost to static. Exterminatus would not come. The galaxy would not burn this world to silence, not yet. Kaelin's arms closed around him, and Malky felt his brother's heartbeat merge with his own, felt the pulse of alien blood that ran through Kaelin's veins now pouring into his. For a moment, he was filled with warmth, with unity, with peace so deep it hollowed every fear. And then he felt the claws of the swarm pierce his flesh, not in malice, but in inevitability. He was lifted, carried, his blood spilling across the broken marble floor, yet the voice told him there was no end, no death, only transformation. The last sight his failing eyes saw was the sky beyond the shattered ceiling. The great wings blotted out the sun, their bellies glowing as rivers of new beasts descended. He realized then that his world was already gone. The choice he thought his to make had never been his. It had been the hive mind's from the beginning. As his body dissolved into the tide, his voice joined the hymn. His cry rose with theirs, part of the unity, part of the hunger, part of the eternity that was no salvation, no peace, only the endless consuming will of the swarm. The hive fell, the people fell. The world itself cracked beneath the shadow of wings, and through it all the voice whispered, calm and inexorable, "We are here, we are forever." The hive was no longer a city. It was a wound, open and bleeding into the endless hunger above. Towers that had stood for millennia now leaned like broken teeth, their shattered spires draped in smoke and fire. The streets were rivers of flesh, some still human, some already reshaped into things that scuttled and clawed, and others half consumed, their mouths still moving in chants even as their bodies dissolved into the tide. The hymns that once echoed as whispers had become thunder, an unbroken song of devotion carried by voices both human and not. Malky moved within it, or rather, something that had been Malky. He stumbled across the fractured floor of the great hall, his garments torn, his body marked with the scars of claws that had lifted him, pierced him, and yet left him alive. His skin burned, not from flame but from within, veins alight with something that was not his blood. Every breath came with a rhythm not his own, his lungs drawing in the hive mind's voice as though it were air. He wanted to resist, to scream, to deny, but each thought splintered into echoes, each echo answering back with a chorus of countless voices. "You are one. You are ours." The console that had once been his salvation lay shattered, sparks dying as its last light flickered into silence. The fleet would not come. The Imperium would not cleanse his world. He had failed them, failed himself, failed the Emperor, or perhaps the Emperor had failed him first. Malky no longer knew where the fault began or ended. Kaelin stood before him amidst the wreckage, untouched by the chaos, radiant with conviction. His robes had been torn away, revealing skin pale and ridged with strange growths, veins glowing faintly beneath the flesh. His eyes no longer looked entirely human. They shimmered with the reflection of something vast and alien. And yet, when he smiled, Malky saw the boy he had once known, the brother who had prayed with him beneath golden banners, who had laughed in sunlit courtyards before war and duty had hardened them both. "You see it now," Kaelin said softly, his voice carrying even as the roar of the swarm filled the air. "You have touched it. You have felt its embrace. There is no death here, only joining. No silence, only song. No chains, only the great unity. Tell me you understand, brother. Tell me you see." Malky swayed, his vision fractured, his body trembling between self and surrender. He looked upon Kaelin and felt love, hate, longing and despair twisted into one. His lips moved, but the words emerged in a whisper he did not recognize as his own. I see. Kaelin's eyes glistened with tears, though they burned with something more than human joy. He clasped Malky's arm, steadying him as the floor quaked beneath the passage of titanic limbs outside. Then you are no longer lost, he said. The Starfather has claimed you as he has claimed me. We are free. Free. The word echoed inside Malky's skull, but it no longer meant what it once had. Freedom was no longer choice, no longer the weight of command or the burden of conscience. It was surrender, the erasure of self into something infinite. It was the vanishing of chains, because there was no longer a you to bind. He wanted to recoil, but the whispering tide within him dulled the impulse, soothing it with visions of endless calm. He saw oceans of stars falling to silence, one by one, their light extinguished as the swarm passed. And yet in that silence there was no loneliness, only eternity. The hall shuddered as a new presence entered. A creature vast and terrible pressed its way through the shattered doorway, its 4 arms gleaming with blood, its maw dripping with strands of torn flesh. Its eyes locked on Malky, and for a heartbeat he felt terror as sharp as ever. Then the terror dissolved, replaced by recognition. It was no stranger. It was kin. Its thoughts pressed against his, and he felt the warmth of belonging. The cultists threw themselves to the ground, their bodies trembling in ecstasy. Kaelin bowed deeply, his voice breaking into praise. Behold the heralds of the Father. They walk among us. They are us. Malky staggered forward, his breath shallow. He felt the creature's gaze pierce him, felt the hive mind extend its hand through the beast's presence, and in that touch he saw visions. Worlds stripped bare in hours, fleets consumed in silence, civilizations erased without memory. He saw humanity's endless struggle against the dark, their empires built only to fall, their prayers raised only to be unanswered. He saw the Emperor, golden and unyielding, yet silent, distant, unable to hear. And then he saw the swarm, endless, eternal, without doubt, without silence. A unity so vast that nothing could defy it. A truth that devoured all falsehoods. And in the heart of that truth he saw himself. Not Malky the governor, not Malky the brother, but Malky as fragment of eternity. He fell to his knees, not in worship, not in surrender, but because his body could no longer carry the weight of what pressed within him. Tears burned his eyes, though he did not know if they were his own. Kaelin knelt beside him, wrapping his arms around him, whispering into his ear, "Do not fear, brother. We are not ending. We are beginning." Malky tried to speak, but the words fractured on his tongue. What emerged was not his voice, but the echo of many. "We are one." The swarm outside howled, its voices merging with the hymn of the faithful. The palace cracked, towers crumbling into the abyss below. The hive city groaned as though the world itself bent beneath the weight of the alien tide. Malky's vision dimmed, his body trembling as the last fragments of self dissolved. For a fleeting moment, he thought of his childhood, the sunlit courtyards, the laughter, the golden banners. He thought of the Emperor, distant and silent, and wondered if he had ever truly been listening. Then even those thoughts slipped away, consumed by the tide. When the transformation came, it was not pain, but inevitability. His heartbeat aligned with the rhythm of the hive mind. His breath joined the choir. His eyes opened not to his own sight, but to the swarm's. He rose, no longer trembling, no longer torn. Malky Dravian, governor of a lost world, was gone. In his place stood a vessel of the Starfather, a voice in the unbroken song of hunger. And as the hive fell into ruin, as wings blotted out the last of the sun, As the faithful dissolved into the tide, the voice of the hive mind rolled across the dying world, calm and infinite. We are here. We are forever. The world had become a cathedral of ruin. The hive no longer reached toward the heavens with ambition, but lay bowed beneath wings of living night. Streets, once filled with the endless march of industry, were now rivers of bone and ichor, the air thick with the perfume of rot. The faithful moved through the wreckage like pilgrims, their voices bound into a single chant that seemed to rise not from lungs, but from the stone itself. Above, the swarm lingered, titanic shadows circling, their bodies birthing new rivers of claws and wings to feed the hunger below. Malky moved among them, though he was no longer Malky. His steps carried the weight of a man hollowed out, refilled with something vaster than his own will. The voices within no longer whispered. They sang, countless, endless, pressing into his thoughts until there was no space left for solitude. He saw the city through 1,000 eyes at once, the scrape of claws on steel, the tear of flesh, the bowing of thousands. He did not command it, and yet it moved with him, through him, as though he were no longer separate, but thread within the weave of inevitability. Kaelin walked at his side, though he seemed less brother now than prophet, his form lit from within by the glow of alien blood. Where he stepped, the faithful parted, their faces raised in awe. They called him by names Malky did not recognize, titles of reverence whispered in languages half-formed, half-human. To them, Kaelin was shepherd, chosen, the voice of the Starfather. And Malky, what was he now? Vessel, witness, or merely another echo? The remnants of resistance had fled into the shadows, those who had not joined the hymn, but still clung to silence. They hid in ruined spires, in tunnels half collapsed, clutching their laser guns with trembling hands. Yet their voices were drowned before they could rise. The swarm's children hunted them relentlessly, not with malice, but with inevitability. Each time Malky felt one fall, their death echoed through his skull as clearly as if it were his own. Each time they screamed the Emperor's name with their last breath, the hive mind answered with silence. A great procession moved toward the central plaza, the heart of the hive where once the Aquila statue had stood. Its wings had been torn down, its body shattered. But from its ruin, the cult had raised a new idol, a spiral of bone and steel that twisted upward, reaching toward the blackened sky. Its surface pulsed faintly, alive with fungus and ichor, and at its crown a vast egg-like cyst throbbed with light. Around it knelt thousands, their voices rising in fevered unison. Kaelin raised his arms, and the hymn swelled. "Behold the sign of the Father," he cried, his voice carrying as though carried by more than air. "The seed is planted. Through it, we are eternal. Through it, the galaxy shall be remade." The faithful fell flat, their foreheads pressed to stone slick with blood. Malky stood at the base of the idol, staring upward, the cyst's faint glow mirrored in his eyes. He felt it pulse in rhythm with his own blood, felt its life call to him. He wanted to look away, but his body would not obey. The voice within pressed deeper, pulling him forward. "You are ours. You are one. You will see." From the cyst came a crack, faint but undeniable. The faithful gasped, some weeping, some tearing their garments in ecstasy. A fissure spread across its surface, ichor leaking in glowing rivulets. The air thickened with anticipation, with hunger, with awe. Malky's chest tightened as he realized he was witnessing not an ending but a birth. He turned his gaze to Kaelin, who stood with eyes alight, his face radiant with something beyond joy. "Do you see now, brother?" Kaelin whispered, though his voice carried to all. This is the promise. The Emperor gave us only toil and silence. The Star Father gives us life eternal. We are chosen to bear his first blessing. Malky's lips trembled. He wanted to protest, to deny, but the words that left him were not his own. We are chosen. The cyst split open. From within emerged a shape half-formed, half-glorious. A creature larger than any man, its limbs still slick with birth ichor, its eyes blazing with alien fire. It moved with the certainty of a thing already complete, already eternal. The faithful screamed in rapture, their voices one thunderous note that made the plaza tremble. The newborn raised its head, its gaze sweeping the crowd, and every soul it looked upon fell prostrate, overwhelmed by love and terror indistinguishable from one another. Malky felt its gaze upon him. For a moment, he stood stripped bare, every memory, every sin, every hope laid open. He saw his childhood, his oaths, his failures. He saw his desperate prayers to a silent emperor. He saw himself clutching at power as it slipped away, watched by a brother who had already surrendered. And then all of it dissolved into nothing, erased by the touch of something greater. The newborn let out a cry, not sound, but resonance, vibrating through flesh and stone alike. The people wept and wailed, tearing at their skin in ecstasy. Kaelin fell to his knees, arms raised, tears streaming. "The Star Father walks among us," he cried. Malky staggered, the weight of unity pressing him down. He wanted to resist, but there was no space left in him for resistance. The voice filled every crevice, every shadow, until there was no Malky, only the echo of a tide unending. The newborn spread its limbs, and from its body poured spores, luminous and writhing, carried on unseen currents. They drifted across the plaza, settling upon the faithful. Wherever they touched, flesh shifted, bones cracked, voices rose. Men and women trembled as ridges burst from their skin, as new eyes opened, as claws tore free. Yet their screams were not of pain, but of ecstasy. They were becoming what they had always been meant to be. Malky felt them settle upon his skin, felt the burn, the reshaping, the rewriting. His vision fractured again, splitting into countless eyes, countless voices, countless hungers. He fell to his knees, clutching his head, but there was no head, no body, no eye left. There was only tide, only hunger, only forever. And as the newborn's cry echoed through the hive, carried upward to the waiting swarm above, Malky knew at last the truth. The Emperor's silence had not been abandonment. It had been mercy. He had kept humanity from hearing what waited beyond the stars. But now the silence was broken, and the truth could not be untold. The hive shook, towers crumbling, the swarm descending in rivers of wings and claws. The faithful screamed. The resistance was torn apart, and above it all the hive mind's voice rolled like an ocean without shore. We are here. We are many. We are eternal. Malky's last thought, before it too was consumed, was not of defiance or faith, but of inevitability. The universe belonged not to men, not to emperors, but to hunger, and hunger would never die. The hive was gone, not in the sense of ruin alone, though ruin covered every stone, but in the deeper way that identity itself had been erased. It no longer felt like a city, nor even a place built by men. It pulsed now like an organ within a body vaster than worlds, its streets arteries, its towers broken teeth gnawed clean. The faithful no longer gathered as citizens, but as cells within a single organism. Their individuality dissolved into the rhythm of the hive mind. Malky walked among them, or what remained of him did. His flesh carried the marks of transformation. Ridges traced his skin, veins glowed faintly beneath his arms, and his breath came not as his own, but in synchrony with the hymn that echoed in every chest around him. He did not command his steps, yet he moved. He did not choose his words, yet when he opened his mouth, the chorus spoke through him. His name, once heavy with duty and failure, now meant nothing. He was no longer governor, no longer Malky, no longer a man. He was vessel, fragment, echo. The newborn creature from the cyst had grown swiftly. In a single night it had doubled in size, its limbs stretching with terrible grace, its eyes blazing brighter than fire. Around it the faithful gathered in circles, swaying, singing, their bodies trembling with devotion that blurred into mutation. Its cry had become the rhythm of the city, each pulse reshaping flesh, each note remaking will. Kaelin stood nearest to it, always, his figure robed in light, his body marked with the blessings of change. The people bowed before him as though before a prophet, their whispers naming him herald, chosen, voice of the Father. Malky watched him, torn between recognition and estrangement. This was his brother, yes, the same face, the same voice, softened now by alien radiance. But he was also something else, something beyond, no longer kin, but conduit. The love Malky had once carried twisted now into something unnameable, sorrow without end, awe without comfort. Beyond the hive's broken walls, the swarm itself had descended in full. He could feel them now as clearly as he had once felt the pulse of his own veins. Biotitans striding across plains of ash, devourer beasts rending what forests remained, sky-darkening wings blotting out even the memory of stars. There was no battle. There was only consumption. Mountains stripped to bone in hours, oceans boiled away, air filled with spores and ash until nothing remained untouched, and always the voice within, vast and calm. This is truth, this is eternity, this is hunger. Yet in that tide there were flickers, moments of resistance, small and futile. Malky felt them through the hive mind's awareness like thorns lodged in flesh. Bands of survivors huddled in collapsed tunnels, whispering the Emperor's name in defiance, clinging to silence where song demanded rule. He felt the swarm move to meet them, claws tearing through stone, the hymn rising as their blood fed the soil. He felt their deaths, sharp as needles, before dissolving into the tide. Each resistance ended the same. Silence devoured, song restored. One night, though night, had lost its meaning beneath the blackened skies. Malky stood upon a broken balcony overlooking the plaza. The idol of bone and steel loomed there still, the cyst above it now hollow, drained of its gift. The newborn prowled nearby, larger still, its body rippling with restless hunger. The faithful knelt before it, their foreheads pressed to blood-slick stone, their voices humming low. Kaelin stood at the idol's base, his arms lifted, his voice weaving praise into command. Malky felt the eyes of the newborn turn toward him. He shivered, not from fear, but from the intensity of recognition. For in its gaze he saw not a beast, not an alien, but a mirror, himself stripped of illusion. He felt its thoughts brush his own, vast and simple, hunger, certainty, eternity. And in that contact he understood fully. The hive mind had no need of kings or rulers. It had no need of names. It consumed not to punish, but because hunger was all that was. Malky was not spared because he mattered. He was spared because he was useful, a vessel for the lie of choice until choice itself was erased. The realization hollowed him further. He had not chosen, not once. Not when he stood before the console, not when Kaelin reached for his hand, not even when he whispered the words, "We are chosen." The hive mind had already decided. His body, his voice, his thoughts, they were never his to keep. He had only been allowed to believe they were, until belief was no longer needed. A crack split the silence. From the ruins of a nearby spire came gunfire, las bolts searing through the dark. A band of survivors had struck, desperate enough to raise weapons against the tide. The faithful turned as one, their hymns shifting into a scream of devotion, rushing to meet the attack. The newborn roared, its cry shattering glass, sending dust cascading from broken towers. Malky felt the resistance's fear, their prayers to the Emperor sharp in his skull like shards of light. For one heartbeat, he envied them. Their voices were still their own, their prayers still their choice. The envy lasted only a moment. The swarm descended, the hymn rose, and silence followed. He felt their bodies fall, their voices extinguished, their blood absorbed into the soil. The envy was gone, replaced by the calm of inevitability. We are one. We are eternal. Kalen turned, his eyes finding Malky on the balcony. His face was radiant, his smile serene. He raised his hand in silent greeting, not as brother to brother, but as prophet to vessel. Malky raised his hand in return, though whether it was his will or the hive mind's, he no longer knew. The hymn swelled again, filling the night, filling the ruins, filling him. He closed his eyes, and the tide swept him further. Memories of childhood faded. Sunlit courtyards, golden banners, whispered prayers to a silent God. All dissolved into the endless song. There was no emperor. There was no brother. There was no Malky. There was only hunger. And as the world itself cracked beneath the weight of wings, as oceans boiled into mist, as forests shriveled into dust, the hive mind's voice pressed calm and final into every thought, every vein, every soul. We are forever. The world trembled as though it had become nothing more than a husk in the throat of some vast creature, swallowed alive. Every hour the swarm pressed deeper. Every breath drawn by those still clinging to humanity grew heavier with spores and ash. The sky was a living storm, wings blotting out the heavens, thunder that was no thunder rolling endlessly across the black. And within it all, the voice of the hive mind murmured like a tide against stone, steady, infinite, inescapable. Malky moved through the ruins of the upper hive, his steps no longer entirely his own. Around him, the faithful swarmed, their faces painted with ash and ichor, their bodies shifting subtly with the touch of alien blood. Some bore claws where hands had been, others spoke in tongues not their own, yet all moved with the certainty of unity. They did not look to him for orders, nor did they need his command. They moved as one body, one thought, one will, and Malky's place among them was as a shadow swallowed into a greater night. Kalen walked ahead, his robe torn and blood-stained, yet glowing still as though light itself had bent to crown him. To the faithful, he was no longer merely brother, priest, or leader. He was herald, prophet, conduit. His voice carried above the roar of wings and the thunder of claws, weaving hymns into law, prayers into command. Wherever he passed, the people fell prostrate, their mouths open in ecstatic cries. To them, Kalen was the living proof of salvation, the bridge between flesh and eternity. And Malky, watching, felt the hollow ache of recognition. This was his brother, yes, but no longer his. The Kalen of their youth, the boy who whispered loyalty to the Emperor by candlelight, who laughed beneath banners of gold, was gone. What remained was the same face, the same voice, yet filled with something greater, something alien. Love still stirred in Malky's chest when he looked upon him, but it was a love twisted by inevitability, like mourning a man already dead. From the plaza below came the sound of new hymns. The newborn creature had grown again, its limbs now long and terrible, its body stretching with an elegance both beautiful and horrifying. It prowled among the ruins with the calm of a king surveying his domain, its cry shaking towers into collapse. Wherever it passed, the faithful bent until their foreheads struck stone, their voices rising in perfect rhythm. Malky felt the creature's thoughts press against his own, and once more he was undone by the sensation of recognition. It knew him. It had always known him. You are ours. You are one. The words filled him, erasing the fragile remnants of self that still tried to resist. He tried to remember his duties, his failures, his choices, but they slipped away, like dust in water. He had not chosen any of it, he realized with a clarity sharper than grief. Not his oaths, not his faith, not his surrender. All along, the hive mind had chosen for him. His life had been nothing more than a corridor leading here, to this moment, to this tide. The plaza shook as the swarm descended further. Behemoths, the size of cathedrals, pressed into the streets, their limbs cracking stone, their maws disgorging rivers of lesser beasts. The faithful cheered, their voices unbroken, even as the creatures tore through what remained of the hive. To them this was not destruction but completion. Their world was not ending, it was becoming what it was always meant to be. Yet flickers of resistance still burned. Malky felt them, far beneath the surface, bands of survivors who clung to silence, who whispered the Emperor's name as though it might shield them. Their defiance rang in his skull like splinters, sharp and bright. He felt the swarm move to meet them, the claws and fangs descending, the hymn rising as their cries were extinguished. Their deaths echoed through him, brief sparks before being folded into the endless night. For a heartbeat, Malky envied them. Their silence had been their own. Their last words had belonged to them. He no longer had such luxury. He staggered, clutching the railing of the balcony as visions flooded him. He saw oceans boil dry, mountains chewed into dust, suns eclipsed by wings. He saw the galaxy as the swarm saw it, not as stars or empires, but as fields of flesh waiting to be harvested. Every world, every race, every hope dissolved into hunger. And within that tide, he saw himself, Kaelin, the faithful, the newborn, all fragments of the same eternal will. Kaelin's voice broke through the vision, strong and radiant. Brothers, sisters, children, look and rejoice. The Father is here. The false masters are gone. There is no throne, no chains, no silence. Only song, only unity, only forever. The crowd roared, their voices shaking the stone, their bodies trembling as mutations spread further, their shapes twisting into the image of what they praised. Malky felt the cry tear from his own throat, though he had not chosen to speak. His voice joined theirs, and the hive mind swelled within him until he was no longer sure where he ended and the song began. The newborn raised its head, its cry splitting the heavens, and spores rained down in luminous cascades. They drifted across the faithful, clinging to skin, seeping into lungs, sinking into blood. Wherever they touched, bodies changed, bones split, flesh reshaped into forms both grotesque and glorious. Yet none screamed in fear. They wept with joy, their cries of ecstasy drowning the sound of tearing flesh. Malky felt the spores on his own skin, burning, reshaping. His vision fractured, splitting into countless sights at once. He saw through the eyes of the swarm outside the city, through the claws that split survivors, through the wings that blotted out the stars. He saw Kaelin, radiant, his arms raised in rapture. He saw himself, trembling, dissolving, becoming. And in that terrible, transcendent moment, he understood fully. There was no salvation. There was no damnation. There was only hunger, infinite and eternal, dressed in the clothing of unity. The cult had not lied. The Starfather had come. But his gift was not life. It was consumption. And humanity, broken by silence, had embraced it willingly. Malkai fell to his knees as the hymn swelled into thunder. He opened his mouth, and the song poured through him. No longer words, no longer prayer, but resonance. He was voice. He was echo. He was nothing. He was all. Above, the swarm tightened its grip, wings folding around the dying world like a shroud. The hive mind's presence pressed into every soul, every stone, every breath. And in its calm, inexorable certainty, Malki heard the final truth. We are here. We are hunger. We are forever. The world was no longer his, not in the sense of land or city or title. Every street, every spire, every ruined plaza had been claimed, reshaped, consumed by the hive and its faithful. The air pulsed with the rhythm of the Starfather, a heartbeat so vast that it pressed into the marrow of bones, shaping thought, desire, and will. Malki moved through the ruins, yet the movement was no longer his own. He was tide, vessel, fragment. He spoke, but the voice that emerged was not his. It was choir, echo, swarm. The hymn rose in unbroken waves, carried by the faithful who had become the same as him, each heartbeat synchronized, each breath shared. Kaelin walked at the center of the plaza, radiant and alien, his form now more creature than man, yet still recognizable in the flicker of memory. Around him, the newborn prowled like a living mountain, its limbs spanning alleys, its eyes ablaze with unthinking hunger. The faithful knelt in concentric circles, their bodies trembling with transformation, their voices fusing into a single, unending song. The plaza itself seemed to pulse beneath them, stone bending, glass melting, blood running in rivulets over steps cracked and broken. Malki felt the presence before he saw it, a pulse deeper than the newborn, deeper than Kaelin, a presence that pressed into thought, bending reality into its will. He turned, and the largest of the swarm loomed over the plaza, vast beyond comprehension, its shape blotting the sky, wings black as void, maw glistening with the promise of consumption. The faithful fell to their faces, crying out in devotion. Those who had resisted were gone, absorbed into the tide, their individuality dissolved, leaving only harmony in the swarm's unyielding rhythm. Kaelin's voice rang out, clear above the tumult. The Father comes. His arms rose, and the faithful echoed him, bodies trembling, veins glowing with alien ichor. All that was false is gone. All that remained in silence is now song. Embrace it. Join the eternity. Malki's eyes swam with visions. He saw the fires that had consumed districts, the collapse of towers, the transformation of the faithful into shapes both familiar and monstrous. He felt the touch of the hive mind in every nerve, in every thought, pressing, shaping, consuming. He wanted to turn, to resist, to scream, but his body moved as if carried by currents too vast for human comprehension. The choice, he realized, had never been his. It had been taken long ago in the first whisper, the first tremor of devotion, the first step toward the Starfather. The newborn raised its head, letting out a cry that split the air, resonating in every stone, every heart. The faithful threw themselves forward in ecstasy, chanting, weeping, offering their flesh to the swarm. Malki fell to his knees, pressed to the cracked marble, and felt the spores settle upon him. They burned briefly, reshaping him, rewriting every fibre. Pain and joy fused indistinguishably as he became part of the chorus, part of the tide, part of the eternal hunger. Kalen knelt beside him, hand resting lightly on his shoulder. "Do you feel it, brother? Not loss, not death, not despair, only unity, only the Father's embrace." His eyes shone, radiant with light that was not human. "There is no choice here, only becoming. Let go, and you will know eternity." Malky could not speak. Thought fragmented, replaced by understanding deeper than words. He felt the pulse of the hive, the rhythm of the faithful, the weight of the Starfather's gaze, and he understood that individuality was an illusion, mortality a chain. Resistance was impossible. The voice inside him roared, merging with the chorus, a wave that swept him into itself. He had been part of the hive all along, the vessel merely waiting for the final transformation. The air above the plaza shivered as wings blotted the clouds. Biotitans descended, their bellies bursting with new life, ichor dripping into the square. Smaller creatures streamed behind them, writhing, clawing, rising from the ash. The faithful embraced them, hands outstretched, mouths open in song. Where they touched the creatures, transformation began instantly. Flesh and bone shifted, eyes multiplied, claws sprouted. And through it all, the hymn never broke, never faltered, never ended. Malky looked upon Kalen, and memory flickered. He saw the boy kneeling beside him in prayer, hands folded under candlelight, whispered oaths to a silent emperor. He saw the laughter in sunlit courtyards, the warmth of shared loyalty, the illusions of choice. They were gone, replaced by this: certainty, devotion, the tide of transformation that consumed all. He felt grief so sharp it seemed to pierce every nerve, yet even grief was folded into the harmony, its edges softened, reshaped, rendered part of the song. The Starfather descended in thought as well as flesh. The largest of the swarm moved into the plaza, its presence pressing against Malky's mind, like gravity. He saw the world through it, every street, every alley, every soul. Resistance flickered and died. The few survivors hiding in tunnels were dragged forth, screaming prayers to a god that would not answer. Their flesh was torn, their voices absorbed into the hymn. The swarm did not kill. They incorporated, remade, transformed. Kalen spoke again, low and intimate, so only Malky could hear. "This is the culmination, brother. All that has been, all that will be, has led to this moment. Let go of fear, let go of regret, let go of self. We are eternal. We are one." Malky's knees sank into the rubble beneath him, his eyes wet with tears that were no longer his own. He felt the tendrils of the newborn's ichor brush his skin, reshaping him, binding him to the hive. Pain and ecstasy collided in a single pulse, a rhythm that made thought unnecessary. He was becoming what he had feared, what he had resisted, yet it was more than fear. It was transcendence. The plaza trembled. Towers collapsed completely, consumed by spires of living flesh that rose in their place. The faithful swayed, arms raised, bodies glowing, veins alight with alien light. Every step, every breath, every pulse contributed to the symphony. Malky's voice joined them fully, no longer distinguishable from the chorus, no longer bound to memory or regret. It was tide, it was echo, he was eternity. And in that final instant, as the newborn stretched its limbs to the clouds and Kalen's song wove through every heart, Malky understood the ultimate truth. Nothing survived alone. Nothing resisted forever. Nothing remained outside the hunger that was both life and death, both creation and erasure. The hive had become one with the world. The Star Father had claimed it wholly, and the voices of the faithful, the living, the transformed, and the lost all merged into a single, infinite hymn that would echo beyond the stars. The plaza erupted into light and shadow, fire and ichor, life and transformation entwined. The city was no more. Only the hive, only the swarm, only the Father's song remained. And Malki, no longer Malki, rose from the marble, a vessel of eternity, his mind a prism refracting countless thoughts, countless voices, countless hungers. He was no longer man, no longer governor, no longer brother. He was the chorus, the tide, the unending will. And as the final towers fell, the stars blotted out, and the hymn rose unbroken, the hive mind whispered across the ruins and through the newly made flesh, "We are here. We are forever." The sun was gone, its light swallowed by smoke and wings, a dying glow hidden beneath the vast shadows of the swarm that now ruled the skies. The world lay in ruin, its towers crumbled, its streets rivers of ichor and bone, its people no longer people, but fragments of a single, living organism that pulsed with the rhythm of the Star Father. Malkai moved within it, not as man, not as governor, not as brother, but as vessel, a fragment folded into eternity. His flesh glowed faintly, veins tracing patterns not his own, pulse in perfect harmony with the unbroken hymn that carried through every corner of the shattered hive. Kaelin walked beside him, radiant and alien, no longer bound by humanity, but clothed in the light of something greater. The faithful followed, bodies shifting, claws emerging, skin reshaping, voices singing a single endless song. The newborn prowled nearby, a mountain of chitin and ichor, its eyes blazing with unthinking hunger, and from its presence spread spores that reshaped every living thing they touched. Nothing remained untouched, nothing remained whole. Malki's mind, such as it remained, wandered to memory, the illusions of choice, the golden banners, the whispers of loyalty, the prayers to an emperor silent and distant. Each memory dissolved into the tide, absorbed into the collective rhythm. He had been governor, he had been brother, he had been man. Yet none of that mattered now. What mattered was the song, the pulse, the inevitability of becoming. Resistance had been brief, survival was a lie. From the heart of the plaza rose the final idol, a spiral of bone and steel crowned with the glowing husk of the firstborn creature. The faithful knelt in concentric circles, their cries merged with the roar of the newborns and the whisper of the hive mind itself. Each voice that joined the chorus became one with it, each heartbeat synced, each breath folded into eternity. The plaza was no longer stone. It was marrow, it was artery, it was a living thing that throbbed beneath the feet of the converted. Malki approached Kaelin, though he knew the steps were no longer his own. His hand brushed against his brother's, and for a moment, the illusion of the past flickered. A boy kneeling beside another boy, candles glowing, prayers whispered. Then the memory snapped, replaced by the radiance of Kaelin's transformed form, his eyes blazing, his voice calling to the Father as though he were the voice itself. "You see it now, brother," Kaelin said, his tone tender, intimate, and terrible. "This is the culmination. There is no fear, no doubt, no chains. Only unity, only song, only eternity. Take your place. Be whole." Malki felt the pull. It was irresistible, absolute, a tide that swept over every fragment of thought and will. He wanted to resist, to scream, to claw back at the last remnants of individuality, but there was nothing left to fight with. Even the memories of rebellion, of oath, of loyalty, had been absorbed, flattened, folded into the greater truth. Resistance was no longer possible. It had never been. The newborn's cry rose again, splitting the skies, and the hive shuddered beneath the resonance. Biotitans fell into the plaza, their limbs cracking stone, their bellies disgorging rivers of lesser creatures. Each creature moved with perfect synchronization, guided by thought beyond comprehension. The faithful pressed against them, faces raised, bodies trembling, their transformations accelerating with every pulse. Limbs reshaped, claws extended, eyes multiplied. Pain and ecstasy became inseparable, and every scream, every sigh, every cry folded into the hymn of eternity. Malchi fell to his knees, the final vestiges of self burning away in the touch of alien ichor. The spores settled on him, reshaping flesh, rewriting blood, synchronizing mind. He felt the hive mind brush against him, a presence vast and infinite. And in that contact he understood fully. There was no man, no governor, no brother, no world. There was only the song, only the father, only the tide. Kalen knelt beside him, eyes radiant. Do not fear, brother. There is no death here, only becoming, only the embrace of the Father. His voice was gentle, yet it carried the weight of the universe. All that was yours to hold is gone. All that was false is swept aside. Be part of this, and you will know eternity. Malchi could not speak. Thought had dissolved into resonance. He was pulse, he was breath, he was him. His lips parted, and a note joined the unbroken chorus, a fragment of self absorbed instantly into infinity. The plaza trembled beneath them, the towers of stone and bone pulsing with the rhythm of transformation. The newborn's roar rolling through the air like the final exhalation of a dying world. Above, wings blotted out the last vestiges of sun. The swarm descended fully, rivers of claws and ichor cascading over the ruins. Survivors were swept into the tide. Resistance shattered before it even formed. Every scream, every prayer, every whispered defiance folded into the song. There was no individuality. There was no choice. There was only unity. Malchi felt it all. The pulse of the newborn, the devotion of the faithful, the vast, infinite hunger of the hive mind. He realized that eternity was not salvation, not reward, not grace. It was completion, a dissolution of self into the greater will, a final surrender to the inevitability of consumption. Fear, hope, doubt, love, grief. They were no longer separate. They were resonance, folded into the eternal tide. Kalen's hand touched his shoulder, guiding him upward. Together they faced the final idol, the spiraling crown of bone and ichor. The faithful pressed around them, forming the last circle, their transformations complete. The hymn rose higher, louder, unbroken. The pulse of countless hearts merged into one. Malchi felt it surge through him, felt it erase the last boundary between self and swarm. He fell forward onto the stone, yet did not fall. He was carried, reshaped, lifted into unity. The newborn lifted its head, a mountain of chitin and ichor, and let out a cry that reverberated across the dying world. The sound was not pain, not triumph, not even joy. It was truth. It was inevitability. It was the Starfather declaring dominion, the hive asserting completion. Malchi felt his consciousness spread, dissolved, folded into it until he was pulse. He was breath. He was voice in a tide without beginning or end. Kalen leaned close, whispering one final word into his ear, though there was no ear to hear it, no self to receive it. Forever. The world shuddered beneath wings and claws, towers collapsing into ash, streets reshaped into living arteries, oceans boiling into mist. The faithful, the transformed, the newborn, the swarm, one voice, one body, one will. Malchi, as he had once been, no longer existed. He was nothing and everything at once, a single thread in the infinite tapestry of the hive mind. And in that final, terrible, transcendent moment, the Starfather's song rolled across the ruins, across the skies, across the bones of the planet itself. We are here. We are eternal. We are forever. The hymn echoed into the void beyond, carrying every pulse, every thought, every fragment of the world into infinity. The stars themselves blinked beneath the shadow of wings. The galaxy hushed, and the Star-Father's children, the faithful, the newborns, the transformed, the swarm, sang as one. Malky's last thought, before it too was folded into the tide, was neither fear nor hope, neither regret nor triumph. It was understanding. The world was gone. Humanity was gone. Choice was gone. And yet, in its absence, there was peace. A terrible, infinite, consuming peace that was no longer life, no longer death, but eternity. And with that, the hive and all within it became the Star-Fathers, and the universe knew the full measure of his will.